Here's what's coming up on episode 81 of the Big Seance podcast. Greg and Dana from Weekend Weird and the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult.
We went on a ghost hunt that night, and then Dana and I kept in touch, and the rest is history.
And now we're married.
So it works.
This has got to be a Lifetime movie at some point. You realize this, right?
Only if Tori Spelling plays me. I mean, the bottom line is, too, if they had robbed us, they would have been really upset with what they would have gotten. Because they just would have had a car full of haunted objects.
And if they killed us, I'm sure that the crime scene technicians would have had a heck of a time. Yeah. Ever since then, things have just continued to ramp up, and to the point where one night we were seeing this woman in our room. Like, we saw this woman in our room, and she just kind of slunk into the closet, and we decided it was time to have a talk. They'll say, well, we had a priest come to the house. And I go, are you religious? And they'll say, no. And I'm like, well, of course it didn't work.
Right,
you know?
Right.
It's all about what you think is going to work.
Greg and I are then able to kind of go, no, wait, this is something that happens to ghost hunters. This is something that, you know, lots of ghost hunters experience. And potentially could be paranormal.
Holy crap. I might have started ghost hunting because of Bigfoot and didn't even know it.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Are you ready for a fun episode? I've so been looking forward to sharing my recent conversation with Greg Newkirk and Dana Matthews, and the time has come. A little later, we've got some listener feedback and another great spectral edition from Tim Prossel. This time, a peaceful spirit. Well, before we pour the tea, let me give you a little background on Greg and Dana. They are the minds behind Planet Weird, and together they founded Weekend Weird, one of the web's most visited destinations for daily paranormal news content. For 8 years, Weekend Weird has curated exclusive stories on topics that range everywhere from recent UFO sightings to personal experiences with the unexplainable to unique investigations into some of the world's most famous paranormal events. After nearly a decade, Weekend Weird continues to dominate the world of weird news thanks to its team of talented writers, an unduplicated wit, and an open-minded approach to all things strange. Additionally, Greg and Dana can regularly be found at events with Planet Weird's Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, a collection of the most bizarre artifacts they've gathered during their adventures, including everything from a cursed painting known to fling itself from walls, a nightmare-inducing idol with the gift of gab, and even a haunted plank of wood from the infamous Amityville Horror House. Okay, pour the tea. Ready, go. I met Greg Newkirk and Dana Matthews at Haunted America Conference this last summer in Alton, Illinois. Everyone's attention was drawn to their traveling museum of the paranormal and the occult and the beautiful display that they had going on there. You couldn't even get over there. It was so busy. And listeners will probably remember me interviewing Greg just briefly that weekend, and I've been following them closely ever since. Hey, you weirdos. Welcome to the Big Seance Parlor.
Hello.
Hey, thank you so much for having us.
I'm so excited to talk to you guys. You two seem to be on top of the world lately. In fact, you just recently, I've seen online that you've been referred to as the newest paranormal power couple.
Yeah, I like that one. That one's all right.
What's it like being a paranormal power couple?
Weird, maybe.
Yeah,
it's weird is probably the thing we use to describe ourselves the most.
Yeah, I think we mostly call ourselves professional weirdos, which seems a bit less ego driven.
Yeah, a little bit.
What you probably never would have expected to be referred to as a paranormal power couple.
We have a hard time taking compliments.
We really do.
we really, really do. It's very nice and all, but we
mostly just go, shut up.
Yeah, believe it or not, we're very shy.
Well, you're also often compared to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Does that bug you, or is that cool?
I think it's equal parts flattering and horrifying.
A little bit of both, probably.
We're lot less of the old time religion going on with us, I think. It's funny because I just recently read Ghost Hunters for the first time since I was a kid, and I was stunned at how every single one of the demons in the book just related to something that old people were really afraid of. Mm-hmm. Whether it was like
biker gangs,
minorities, or biker gangs, or kung fu, or Dungeons and Dragons. So it's flattering because they were such big personalities, mm-hmm. and they had such an influence on ghost hunting. But it's also kind of horrifying because I don't want people to think that we're Bible thumpers. We're definitely not.
Yeah, I remember reading that book. It took me a while. It does nowadays with books. And, I'll read a couple pages and I'm like, okay, I'm down with that. I'm cool. And then, you get to another couple pages and I just throw it down, and my people in my Facebook group for the podcast will be able to tell you I kept putting like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is in here. Or I'd take a screenshot of what page I was reading and this is crazy.
Well, we've taken it in stride. We did actually dress up as Ed and Lorraine for Halloween this year.
We did.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. That was such a good picture.
So we're taking it in stride. It's okay.
So I think we could talk all day long about the things that you guys are involved in. And obviously my listeners would be most interested in your traveling museum, I'm assuming. But seriously, you guys have the cutest and most fascinating backstory that probably makes you gag. But it's so very interesting. And, it goes back to before your lives even intersected. But then you've come together for this journey. Tell us a little bit about the journey. I know this could probably be a 5-hour interview, just this question, but
we'll give you the Cliff's Notes version. Dana and I hated each other.
Well, I was okay. To be fair,
Dana
I had every reason to hate Greg because he was kind of a jerk to me. So a long time ago, once upon a time, about 15 years ago, Greg and I both ran rival ghost hunting websites, and
GeoCities, baby.
GeoCities, back in the GeoCities days.
The whole page was like Left Justified, and crappy page builder, animated skeletons
dancing in fires. So I'm from Canada and Greg is from rural Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. So we both had ghost hunting teams, and we were relatively young at the time. And ours, the Girly Ghost Hunters, as we were called in Canada, we actually landed a Canadian television show. And Greg and his friends were not really happy about that.
Well, because we were like a brother-sister team mm-hmm. for a little while there, for like a year or two. And what Dana's not telling you is the reason they started their website is because of us. They sought us out and we gave them tips. We gave them tips and like helped them out. And then they got a TV show. And our team of boys was so upset and irritated that we didn't have a TV show.
I believe the term is butthurt.
We were butthurt. And so to exact revenge, we recreated their entire website with us in drag and replaced all of the photos, made all of the quotes make them sound really dumb, and then SEO bombed it so hard that when people looked for their team, they found us, and they found this fake website.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Dana and her friends were not very happy about.
Nope.
What was the last thing I ever said to you in a internet chat?
We had a argument on Yahoo Instant Messenger, if that tells you how long ago this was. Greg, I believe, he was, 16?
Mm-hmm.
And we got into, this was the final argument. And we got into an internet argument, and Greg called me a hairy slut.
So it doesn't even make sense.
No.
Gregory.
I know.
Right?
I know.
16-year-old boys.
And
it was
here's
the
the thing.
equivalent of like kids fighting on a playground.
Well,
is
and
sort of
listen,
what.
Dana's a few years older than me, and I had a crush on her, so it was a forbidden love at that point. And I really did have a crush on her, and I never admitted it. But years later, I started to feel really bad, and we hadn't talked since. And I tried to send Dana emails, and I wasn't getting any responses. And so I finally said, you know what? Screw it. I'm moving to the West Coast. I want to clear my conscience. I'm going to go to Canada, and I'm going to apologize. So I rented a car, printed out photos of the girls, and knew what city they lived in, which just so happens to be the second largest city in Ontario. And I just drove there. And
Were you still a teenager at this point?
I was 21.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
okay.
21. And I drove up, and I just started showing pictures and asking around. And you know what? I found them in half an hour. Half an hour of being in that city, I found them. And they were horrified to see me.
Yes, we were. Greg's stalker skills were
But you know what?
pretty amazing.
We went on a ghost hunt that night, and then Dana and I kept in touch, and the rest is history.
And now we're married.
So it works.
This has got to be a Lifetime movie at some point. You realize this, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not going to make me look very good.
Only if Tori Spelling plays me. That's the only.
Oh, no.
Well, a Lifetime, right?
But-
Yeah, I guess. Okay.
But you guys glow together now. It's so awesome.
We like each other.
I guess. Yeah, he's all right.
I'm just so sad that I wasn't hip and cool to you guys until hip and cool. That sounded dorky. I wasn't hip to you guys until the Haunted America conference. Where have I been? What was I doing?
Well, I mean,
yeah.
we hear a lot that people are like, you guys are just bursting on the scene this year. And I mean, we've been around a long time. We've been doing it, almost 20 years, but we haven't really made a run for it until the last year. So, we've been doing more things and dedicating more time. I mean, this is the first year that we've really, this has become our career. It's always one of those deals where, it's always been a hobby. But we made a run for it this year. And so I think that's why people are seeing us pop up more, because we can drop things at a hat and go check out a case, or we can spend more time going to conferences and setting up when we can actually live off of it now.
Mm-hmm. So you guys travel all over with haunted items, and you have a cool display. And I want to get to some of those specific items. But first, just recently, you wrote up a story about how your artifacts possibly saved you from being murdered. What's that
God.
about?
This actually
That is so
happened,
fascinating.
Like, was it last
It was like
weekend?
last week. It was one of the scariest things we've been through.
Oh.
And it's funny because people always say, ghosts are scary, but people are scarier. And this is a really great example of that.
Mhm.
We were on our way back from an event with Strange Escapes at the Mount Washington in New Hampshire.
And we have to drive everywhere. So, I mean, no plane would want us to load on all of our haunted stuff on.
I don't think the
Right.
passengers would want that. But so we've got this car. It's a little Scion, and it's just loaded to the hilt with antique boxes and a big wooden chest, and everything's got a padlock on it. There's all kinds of haunted objects in these, and we drive around the country with this. And this was one of the longer trips we've taken. And we were on the way home, and we decided, let's go down through the coast, and we'll visit Salem and make a few stops along the way.
One of the things that we like to do is when we're in sort of areas where we don't really have any places to stop, we just start asking people, like, is there anything haunted around here? Is there anything weird? And I mean, 90% of the time they look at you like you're completely insane. But the other 10% of the time you actually find these really cool locations, like graves with windows in them, and like all the kind of like hidden gem stuff that you wouldn't necessarily be able to find online.
So we it's probably about 3 a.m. It's like 2:30 in the morning, and we stop for gas. And this guy notices some of the stickers on the back of our car, and we've got this honk if you listen to Art Bell bumper sticker. And this guy was like, "Oh man, I love that bumper sticker." Art Bell, he was one of my favorite Coast to Coast hosts. And so we strike up this conversation, and I ask him, is there cool stuff around here? What's neat? And he says, well, there's this monster, this red-eyed monster that is out by this cemetery out near Friendsville. In Friendsville's this little town, like 400 people live in it, and it's on the border of West Virginia and Maryland. And he's like, head out down there. And he's like, here, and he scribbles this little map, and he sends us out to this place. And so we drive out there, and we're both looking forward to stretching our legs, and we're kind of creeping along real slow, trying to figure out where this cemetery is, because it's supposed to be out in this field. Well, all of a sudden, I see these high beams in my rearview mirror, and then bam, crunch, this guy hits us. And I freak out because, we're in the middle of nowhere. I don't know what happened. I wasn't driving erratically. I was creeping along real slow. And so
all that kept going through my head was all of the bad Reddit threads I've read about like people doing like crazy road trips where like there are people laying in the road and you get out to help them and all of a sudden you get ambushed. So like my brain instantly went into like we're about to get like robbed. Like
I wasn't even there.
It reminded me of like Jeepers Creepers or like one of those.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it was, I never really thought that Maryland could get this rural, but it was basically West Virginia. And so I get out to go assess the damage, and I can see the dome light click on in the car behind us. And it's this big boat of a car. It's an old Lincoln. And I can see in the passenger seat is this woman who looks like Tammy Faye. I mean, her just like bright makeup, blue eyeshadow, huge hair. And in the back seat are these two guys who are like in old 70s suits. They've got mustaches and like shoulder length hair. They look almost identical. And then what I see next is what really scares me is the driver. And this guy was just one of the gnarliest looking dudes I'd ever seen. He was really old. He was probably in his late 60s, early 70s. Really weathered skin, slick back hair. He's got a bolo. He looked like what I imagine like a snake handling preacher would look like.
He looked like what my nightmares are made out of.
Yeah, he was a scary dude. But the scariest part about him,
it was like True Detective was happening.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Right at that moment in time.
The scariest part about this guy was the whole like left side of his face was this massive bruise. And his eye was bruised. So it was like his eye was completely red and bloodshot, except for the pupil. And the dude was the scariest dude. And I got this feeling, and this is strange, and I kind of toned it down for the article, but I got this feeling like I'd met this guy before. Like I knew this guy. I'd seen him, and I couldn't shake it. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out how I know this guy. But the vibes he was giving off were just terrible, awful vibes. And he's like, oh, I didn't see you there. I'm really sorry. Or, how's the car? How's the damage? And I looked down, and the only thing that really happened is the bumper had popped out. It sounded way worse than it looked. There was just this really big, deep gash in the bumper. And I said, you know what, man, it's fine. That's what bumpers are for. It's not a big deal. And he said, well, a lot of these things you can't tell how bad it is until you get down the road. And I'd feel real bad if we didn't exchange insurance. And I was like, listen, man, it's not worth getting insurance involved with. I was like, if your car's fine, mine's totally fine. It's no big deal. And he insisted. So I was like, okay, all right, fine. And I walked back to the car, and I got into the passenger seat, and I lean over Dana to go into the glove box, get my information. And I'm telling Dana, this guy's super spooky. I'm really freaked out. I don't know what the deal is. And so we're kind of talking back and forth. And all of a sudden, the back of the car starts to rattle. And one of the boxes is just shaking like crazy, like something's trying to get out of this box. And we both stopped and turned around to look and see where this noise was coming from. And as we were looking for the noise, I noticed that this guy did not go to his glove compartment. He went to his trunk. He had popped his trunk, and we see the two doors of the weirdos in the back seat pop open. And I just said, F this. I'm not sticking around. And I put the pedal to the metal. And for like 40 minutes, I drove that thing faster than it's ever been driven until we were well down the highway. And then we stopped at a well-lit gas station and kind of caught our breath. And the craziest part is we would have never seen that if the stuff in the back of the car hadn't started rattling. It was like it was trying to go, hey, pay attention, pay attention. I mean, 30 more seconds, and who knows, that guy could have had a shotgun or something.
Oh, my. Do you have an idea of, maybe what object? Have you narrowed down what object it could have been?
I want to say that it was probably what we call the Idol of Nightmares, or kind of internally we call him Billy because he's an idol. He seems to be the one that he's the most active object that we have, and he's the one that I think has, as strange as it might sound, more of a connection with us than the rest. So I think that it was probably him that was doing it. That would make the most sense to me, but I can't be positive.
Well, we're glad to see that you're safe, but that was an awesome read.
Well, I'm glad that my terror was entertaining.
I mean, the bottom line is, too, if they had robbed us, they would have been really upset with what they would have gotten. Because they just would have had a car full of haunted objects.
And if they killed us, I'm sure that the crime scene technicians would have had a heck of a time.
Yeah.
So I've got to know, what was the first item that you guys took in?
It's kind of a hard question to answer because it was, the museum started completely by accident. It wasn't something we'd ever set out or intended to do. We never really intended to collect haunted objects, but we just kind of, over the years, we'd been on so many investigations and people knew we were weird, so they would give us their stuff that they thought was haunted. But I think the first thing that I ever collected personally, it was a little piece of coal from an old mining cemetery that was actually thrown at me by what I at the time thought was probably a ghost. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing, and that was probably 1999. And then it's just kind of been little things here and there ever since.
And now bigger things too. I mean, some of the objects that people are, because everything, we always tell people, everything in the museum's been donated. We don't buy anything. That's
one of our biggest rules.
Yeah.
The things we're supposed to have will find their way to us.
Mm-hmm. And so the objects are growing in intensity. I mean, we just had someone donate for an extended period of time a Dybbuk box.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Which is he basically handed it to us in a pelican case, and it was actually the center point of a few episodes of a television show in Maine called Haunt Me. Mm-hmm. And so we get items that range anywhere from like tiny pieces of coal, like Greg was talking about, all the way up to these, insanely.
A lot of porcelain clowns, too, that are
a lot
probably
of gargoyles
not haunted.
from the dollar store.
I think one of the things, everybody's always like, well, how does an item become haunted? And I think one of the ones that people overlook, one of the ways is you haunt it yourself. A lot of these things that people have, they just freak them out. And because of that, they've put so much energy and intention into that they're only going to be haunted for you. Mm-hmm. And so we receive a lot of stuff. I'd say, 90% of the stuff that we get never acts up for us.
And I mean, the thing is, with all of the objects that we do receive, we put them through like a series of testing to, see if we can capture any kind of evidence. And like Greg said, a majority of the time, there's nothing really happening with the objects themselves, but every once in a while, there's a percentage of the museum objects that really are genuinely active, regardless of who's around them.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of us here are obsessed with the Victorian days of spiritualism. Do you have any haunted items from that time period that would just make me insanely jealous?
I would say the dress probably qualifies, doesn't it? The wedding dress?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's that, like 1840s or something like that, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
At least the best we can trace it. We have a wedding dress that was given to us from a woman up in Maine, and she had found it in an old house that she'd moved into. And it's got to be like 1840s-ish, and it's still held together pretty well. And as soon as she found it in this old trunk, she would open the trunk, and this woman wearing the dress would just start to show up in her home.
Oh my gosh.
And it was freaking her out so bad. It took her a while to realize that it was actually her finding this dress that started it. And she couldn't get it to stop. She would put the dress back. She would lock the chest. She would hide it away. But the woman just kept appearing and showing up. And I mean, she was benign. She wasn't, trying to scare her. It didn't appear that way. But it just got so much that she said, I can't have this thing anymore. So we've had this thing for maybe 6 months, and we haven't seen her yet. So maybe she's still bothering this lady.
Gosh, that is so interesting. Have you guys ever had to part with an item because it was just too much drama?
There's one that we're going to have to part with. It's going to be the first time, probably.
Wow.
And it's just most of the items I really do think are happy to have a place where they're trying to be understood, and they're trying, we're trying to help them or give them a place to live when other people might burn them or bury them. But there's one that just clearly wants to go home, doesn't want to be with us. And we've taken to calling her the crone. And she's this.
Oh, I saw the crone.
You've seen the crone, the woman with the nails in her eyes and the noose on the neck. She was found by a couple hikers in the Catskill Mountains. And they'd found her in a cave, and the cave had elements of some kind of ritualistic magic happening there. And one of them said, I'm taking this thing home. And the other guy said, absolutely not. This is how horror movies start. And the guy said, nah, I don't believe any of that stuff. So he took it home, and almost immediately they'd start to see that the statue was never where they'd left it, would move around the house. They began to notice this really thick smell of pond water that would permeate the building.
They were even finding wet footprints.
Yeah, wet, muddy, bare footprints that would walk through the house. And
all of their animals were just completely
totally freaked out. And the final straw was they came home one day, and their dog would not go into the living room. And they walked in the house, and they saw this old woman, totally, completely nude, dripping wet, scraggly hair, just kind of crouched in the corner of the room. And they said, that is it. And they went online and said, what do we do with this thing? Who do we send this to? And one of the PAs for Finding Bigfoot, who had just spent like 2 weeks in the van listening to all of our stories, was reading it in the middle of shooting another episode. And he said, get a hold of Greg and Dana. They can help you. And I just told the guy straight up, I said, listen, you need to take this thing back to the cave you found it in. You need to apologize and then back out of the cave and hope that that's enough. And he said, no, my friend won't go back with me. I don't know if I can find the cave. I don't want to meet who put it there, yada, yada, yada. So I said, okay, well, here's my post office box. Send it over. We'll test it out. The day we got it, we did what we do with everything. We take photos all the way around. We want to know if it's changed, how it changes while we've got it. And then we just left it in the chair because, like I said, 90% of the stuff never acts up. And we just went about our day. And later that night, we were watching Netflix, and we heard a crash in the office. And we thought, well, it's the cats fighting. They fight the same time every night. So I went to go break it up. Cats are nowhere to be found. They are terrified, hiding under our bed. The office door is actually closed. So I open the door and I walk in, and I can't see to find anything that's the matter. Nothing appears to have happened until I almost step on Jesus, who had been ripped off of a crucifix and thrown to the other side of the room. And I look over to the crucifix, and it's just Jesus' single arm swinging back and forth on it. And right below him is the crone. So that was the first indication that there was something going on with this item that was probably not very nice. And we set up a trail camera and watched it. And it took about a month or two. And eventually we caught it moving by itself on camera. And ever since then, things have just continued to ramp up, and to the point where one night we were seeing this woman in our room. Like, we saw this woman in our room, and she just kind of slunk into the closet. And we decided it was time to have a talk. And we tried to have this conversation and say, listen, we're giving you a space to live. You need to respect our space, and we'll respect you. You need to understand this. And as we were doing this, we heard the sound of rushing water on the other side of our place. And we'd just gone through a burst pipe and it's a horrible experience to go through a burst pipe. And so we jumped up and ran to the other side of the house, and there's nothing there. We can't hear anything. And so we were looking at each other like, what in the world is going on? And then we heard this thump in the living room, and like a rolling noise. Went back into the living room. The crone had rolled off of the coffee table and under the television stand.
Which is weird in and of itself if you've ever seen it, because it does have like nails driven into its eyes. So the idea of like the object rolling on its own is not possible. Like
right.
it couldn't possibly roll because it has nails that would stop it from rolling.
Right. Mm. And so I got down on my hands and knees to reach under the TV stand and grab it. And I hear Dana scream and run over. And the television had started to tip down onto my head. And she had to stop it and push it back up. And that was the night that we said, okay, that's it. If this is how it's going to be, we're going to have to lock you up. And I never make decisions like that very lightly, because I think that, you know, making enemies with something that you don't understand is probably a terrible idea. Mm-hmm. And I said, we're going to have to lock you up. And we heard 3 loud booms on the wall. And we just kind of took that as an indication that this thing wasn't going to cooperate. So we kept her locked up. She still stays locked up. Occasionally at events, we'll unlock her for a little bit and show people. And there are some events where if the vibe is too aggressive, mm-hmm. we won't even open her out of the case. But the activity is still, I mean, we still get that smell of pond water once in a while. And we just know it doesn't want to be with us. So that one, we're going to have to figure out where the cave is and take it back.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like you had some pretty good intuition with that one, though, because when I interviewed you this summer, I remember you saying you don't let people touch that one because you hadn't really figured out yet what it was about.
That's Absolutely. One of the very few items mm-hmm. that we won't let people handle. And there's not many of those. But that one, you know, even now, Dana and I's opinions on what it was made for are a little bit different. I think because of where it was found, and in the history of where it was found, I think that it was probably someone was trying to summon and potentially bind the spirit of a witch mm-hmm. to use for their own purposes.
I think I have a kind of different idea about it. And I think that it may have been made sort of for the same reason that we create gargoyles and put them on the outside of buildings to sort of like ward off either people or other spirits. But I think that it was set there by some kind of magical practitioner to sort of like create a sacred space. And so then these 2 guys wandered in and basically they desecrated a church, basically. It was sort of the equivalent of desecrating a church, which is why she's so angry.
Right. So, regardless, it has to go home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if you guys are like the, last stop for a lot of these haunted objects? I mean, I know that would go back to the cave, but where do objects go when you guys can't handle them?
Honestly, that one's really the only one that we've had that we haven't been able to wrap our heads around.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the stuff, I think, people ask us all the time. They said, "Do you have a priest that comes in? What do you do? Do you bind them?" And we don't really do any of that stuff. I mean, again, Dana and I have different opinions mm-hmm. on how to deal with this stuff, and sometimes Dana will take a precaution that I won't take, and vice versa. But I really think that when it comes to this stuff, people get really freaked out when they don't understand something. It's really scary when something happens that it's not supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
When an object is giving off some kind of a strange energy or doing something it's not supposed to do. But I found that the more calmly that we approach these things, and I think this applies to all hauntings, the more calmly we approach them and the more we actually try and understand the message that they're trying to send,
mm-hmm.
The less scary it is. And I think that's really what a lot of hauntings are. They're just something's trying to send us a message, either intelligently or not intelligently. And it's just up to us to understand it. We haven't really had too many situations we've been through that are ones that we can't deal with. The bottom line is you just have to know you're in control. You have to know that you're in control. And the minute that you start to waver on that is when you're in trouble.
Well, I know you must have a response ready for this one. Let's say you run into someone who has your best interest at heart. They mean well, and they go into why what you're doing is so dangerous, or maybe even they're an internet troll, or maybe they just think you need Jesus. What do you come back with in those situations? Because I'm sure they happen, right?
My father's a Baptist minister, and I was supposed to be a Baptist minister. I'm actually the first in a long line to not take up the cloth. So
Wow.
you can imagine how they feel about my my career path. My response is generally that I understand where they're coming from. I know that they have my best interests at heart, and so I appreciate that. Anyone showing concern, I'm appreciative of that. But at the same time, I don't think that the world is black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd be great if it was. It'd be super great if it was. But if the world was black and white, I don't think that we would be dealing with hauntings. I don't think that we'd have these mysteries to figure out because we would already know. And I think that the world is too big of a place for anyone to be looking at it as black and white. We're dealing in a gray area.
I think one of the things that is also really interesting about that is that, like, some of the objects that we have respond to different types of religious iconography. So
Right.
Some of the objects that we have will respond to crucifixes. Some of the objects that we have will respond to different types of religious iconography. So it really depends. And I think that a majority of what it really boils down to, and this is something that we talk about a lot, is really, and you even touched on it already, is your intention.
Right.
Your intention behind what you're doing.
When someone's dealing with a haunting that they can't handle, I think it's because they aren't giving enough intention, that they are equipped to handle it. And so what do? They call in a priest, or they call in a light worker,
or a shaman,
or a rabbi. They all do the same thing. And that thing is really focusing their intention. Some people call it prayer. All that's doing is really focusing intention. So, the old saying that there's many paths to God, I think is true. I think it just depends on what you believe in, and that you believe hard enough. And when you do, you can deal with these things. So, again, it's like if the minute you start to waver in the idea that you are strong enough to handle it, whether that strength comes through God or a special crystal or through belief in yourself, just don't waver and you'll be able to handle that. And I think that really applies to a lot of things in life in general.
Yeah, I think that, sometimes people put those blessings in, when people start saging things, and sometimes that stuff backfires, doesn't it?
Oh, sure. And
Yeah.
it backfires because they don't really believe that it's working.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first questions that I ask when people come to us and they're dealing with some kind of a haunting is I say, what have you tried to do to take care of the haunting? And they'll list a bunch of things off. And I go, they'll say, well, we had a priest come to the house. And I go, are you religious? And they'll say, no. And I'm like, well, of course it didn't work.
Right.
Right. It's all about what you think is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So my suggestion is always, who do you respect? Who do you believe? 110%. Invite that person in to deal with this for you.
Mm-hmm.
And generally that'll work.
That is such an awesome answer. And a lot of people, I have discussions a lot of times about this type of thing. Well, do you sage? Do you not sage? Do you have, that's an awesome answer.
Yeah, I mean, if you think it works, it'll work.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, it really is as silly and simple as that. But that's easier said than done. Belief is a tricky thing, particularly in an age where we're all very cynical about belief and faith and things like that. So it sounds simple, but it's not.
I want to make sure I don't pass up the opportunity to talk about the fact that you guys have a live feed on your site,
Yes.
the camera. How do you choose what goes, how do you schedule that?
We're kind of willy-nilly right now. We just sort of like, the bottom line is the live feed's awesome for us because it's other people helping us investigate the objects that we have in the museum. So it's, 10 people are better than one.
Right.
And so if something is sort of acting up or we're noticing a bit more activity around a certain object, sometimes we'll will we put it underneath surveillance, in that case?
And a lot of times people will request a specific item, and we'll get, a couple emails that say, hey, we'd really like to see Billy on display. Can we do an EVP session with Billy? And so we'll do live sessions with them. It's just, weirdo season has just finished. So we've been slammed. And now that we're finally going to have a couple months where we can prep for next year, we've got more time to actually swap things out. We were trying to do it weekly. It really just depends on where we're at and how busy we are.
And we've had quite a few objects donated to the museum this.
Oh gosh, in the last couple months that haven't seen the live cam yet.
Yeah.
So, we're ramping up. We've got a lot of really cool ideas for the live cam that I think we'll probably implement in a month or two. But it's a place that's great because, we get to interact with people and people at any time. There's a K2 meter there. We'll do EVP sessions there. There's a clock so people can tell, if there's no funny business going on. And it's been a really, really neat addition to the museum and the research we've been doing with these items.
I think it's very cool. You guys were recently on an episode of Kindred Spirits, like my new favorite show.
Isn't it the best?
It's so great. It's so good.
And it's so needed.
It is. It really is.
Because, we've spent a lot of time in this world where all ghosts are demons for some reason. And so having, two very sensitive investigators like Amy and Adam take on family cases in a really sensitive, an interesting way. It's so needed. It's such a wonderful show.
And do you remember what the title of that episode was? I want to make sure did it have an episode number? Do you remember?
It was episode 5.
I don't
remember what the title was. Oh no, it's Breaking and Entering.
Breaking and Entering.
That's right.
So you guys are sitting here Skyping with Amy and Adam on camera, just like we're Skyping right now. And, the topic and the items that you were talking about happened to be having some activity at that very moment. And it was, I'm sure, very shocking and all on camera.
Oh, it was awesome. It was great. But I mean, it's a testament to the kind of work that they're doing, to be talking to them and saying, because they didn't, at this point, they didn't know if it was a haunted object. They wanted to know what they should look for to see if it was a haunted object.
And they were, I think, at that point also trying to really pinpoint who it potentially was who was causing the activity in the house. So the fact that it kind of unfolded the way that it did was so perfect.
I mean, it was clockwork because we were talking about how a lot of times haunted objects are really just a way for someone to send a message to someone.
And I mean, in the case of like the objects too, that they were handmade. They were made by the person that the family members were.
You can't have a better connection.
Yeah, like someone sat with them and made them with their hands, and they put all of their love and intention into them. And
as we're talking about this, I remember Adam was really distracted, kind of looking around, and finally he says, "I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but there's a weird noise happening." And sure enough, it was these bells that their grandmother had made. And they were rattling on this shelf as if to say, yes, this is what's happening. I'm trying to send you a message. I'm still here. It was really wild.
So that must have been an awesome moment to be a part of, that breaking moment where everything fell into place. The answer was there.
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. It was so cool. It was really neat.
I really loved seeing the research side of things on that show and kind of how it's so cool. It makes you, and I love paranormal television, and I, have some of the same, I love it, but I also have some of the same concerns that, a lot of people talk about paranormal TV shows, but it makes you wonder if all the other shows do that same research. You know?
I mean, the greatest part about Kindred Spirits is the fact that Amy and Adam are the executive producers. So, they're in charge of how the show is made, which is so great because it's a television show about paranormal research that's being created by paranormal researchers. So they're
which is what we don't have a lot of.
No, I mean,
it's a lot of story producers who are just, they're trying to make all the puzzle pieces fit. And that's great because, television is entertainment. That's what it's there for. anyone who's doing their research from paranormal television is probably going to be disappointed. But in the case of something like Kindred Spirits, where they are the executive producers, that's
even a Paranormal
incredible.
Lockdown is also the same
Exactly,
way. Nick
same
Roth,
thing.
You know, he is in charge of creating a show, and the bottom line is he's an investigator first, and that's great because I think that creates quality paranormal TV where you feel like you can relate. You're like, you know, as a paranormal investigator, you go, yes, this is how we do it. This is really what actually happens versus, you know, just kind of craziness that's been put together by a handful of producers.
Yeah, those are the only two shows I've really been watching now. I've been loving Lockdown as well. So outside of the paranormal, and this is a question I ask a lot of my guests and even Amy and Adam recently, outside of all the strangeness, because you guys are not just this traveling paranormal museum, so you might be able to talk a little bit about the other stuff you're involved in, but what kind of nerds are you outside of what we would expect?
Dana's a hardcore Tolkien nerd.
I'm a fantasy nerd to a weird degree, probably. I love everything Tolkien. I love Harry Potter. I love like everything that is nerdy and fantasy based is sort of, you know, the world that I live in my brain 24 hours a day. If I could be wearing elvish like pointed ears right now all day long, I would.
I've seen a little bit of that on your Facebook page now that I think about it.
I try to keep it to a minimum, but yeah, I can take it to a weird degree.
I don't know. It's hard because I think I'm so obsessed with the paranormal and the strange and the unexplained that's always kind of been my first priority. But
I'll let you I'll give you kind of an exception. You guys are also really into like cryptozoology and UFOs and stuff like that. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. Years ago, Dana and our background is obviously ghosts. That's where we came from. That's how we started. But we decided we wanted to kind of branch out into other types of strangeness. And so we started to hang out with alien abductees and hang out with Bigfoot hunters. And it's given us some really cool insight into the paranormal that I think more and more groups. There's a weird thing that happens in the paranormal because the paranormal is much bigger than we know. It's not just ghosts. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. And there's a weird thing that happens where groups segregate. So ghost hunters don't talk to UFO hunters and UFO hunters don't talk to Bigfoot hunters. And I think that part of it is because as weirdos, we kind of get self-conscious about what we're doing. And so it's nice to be able to go, well, yeah, you know, I look for invisible creatures in abandoned houses, but hey, at least I'm not getting abducted by aliens and probed in the butt. Those guys are nuts. Well, I think that if these people were going back and forth and were talking and sharing information, they might find that there's really strange crossover.
And that's something that we've experienced, you know, over the past 10 years where when we sort of made that decision to say, hey, let's try to do everything. Let's go and see if we can find Bigfoot or experience an abduction or something, you know, like anything that like exists beyond ghosts.
Like alien abductees, they experience poltergeist activity, but they just don't attribute it to ghosts. They call these entities the invisos. They are alien entities that come down and rattle things in their house and move things around. Even Bigfoot hunters experience that. They just think that Bigfoot is cloaking. One of
the things that we've experienced while doing Bigfoot investigations is tons and tons of battery malfunctions, just cameras stopping and batteries draining. And a majority of the Bigfoot investigators that we're out, you know, in the field with will say, oh, you know, it just happens, it's cold out and whatever. But I mean, if Greg and I are then able to kind of go, no, wait, this is something that happens to ghost hunters. This is something that, you know, lots of ghost hunters experience. It's and potentially could be paranormal.
Of course, we're the type of people who believe that Bigfoot is a ghost. And a lot of cryptozoologists, they really violently oppose that idea, even though it makes perfect sense. I won't go into my diatribe now, but look it up. It makes sense. Bigfoot's totally a ghost. But again, there's that, you know, hesitance to kind of cross the streams, so to speak. But because we've been involved with ghosts, we can point at those things. And, we can point at things in alien abductees experiences that point towards poltergeist experiences. So, even one of the craziest things, one of the first ghost hunts I was ever on was in that old mining cemetery. And we were seeing these big creatures move around, and we were getting hit with pieces of coal. And the whole time we're like, oh my God, ghosts are real. This is really happening. Well, we went and revisited it like a year ago, the cemetery, for the first time in years I'd been there. And we were walking around, and I was there with one of my old ghost hunting teammates. And just for fun, we decided, let's do some Bigfoot calls. It's up in the middle of nowhere. Something started calling back. And then we started seeing these strange figures again, and little rocks were being tossed at us. And I went, holy crap, I might have started ghost hunting because of Bigfoot and didn't even know it. But it's, I've got 10, 15 years of experience on where I was then, and I can kind of point to those strange crossovers. So I think that it's important for us to be well-rounded as paranormal investigators, because you never know. The world is weirder than we think it is, even when we know it's weird.
Well, and you'll have to direct me to some of that research, because I have, I've grown and my opinions have changed and things recently, but I have been in the past one of those people that have been skeptic of the connection of everything in the paranormal, so that's interesting to me.
Oh, we're going to talk. I'm going to change your mind. You give me the time and you're going to walk away going, okay, Bigfoot's a ghost.
Well, why don't I want to give you guys the opportunity to, and you can take this wherever you need to, because like I said, you guys are involved in a lot of things, but tell us, where you guys have kind of a main hub, and tell us what's coming up maybe, and where to find you and where to go if people want more Greg and Dana and all things weird.
Well, I mean, we run an online magazine called Week in Weird, and
weekandweird.com.
Weekandweird.com, and we basically just cover all forms of paranormal news.
Our own adventures of other
yep.
people, haunted houses that you can investigate you've never heard of before, all kinds of stuff like that.
And that's updated daily, so you can definitely find us there.
If people want to learn more about the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, they can go to paramuseum.com, and there's all kinds of listings of the objects that people can see and dates where they can come and see the museum. And we're actually booking for 2017 right now. So we've got, I think, like half a dozen things set up for 2017. But if there's anywhere you want to see the museum, let bookers know, and we'll be there. We're always excited to travel wherever we're invited. And if people want to know more about Dana and I and the things that we're into, weirdhq.com. That's kind of the central point for all the stuff we do.
It has been so exciting to talk to you guys, and I'm stoked for people to hear this. So you guys rock. Thanks for coming to the parlor and talking to us.
We've been looking forward to this for so long. Thank you so much for having us.
So that conversation with Greg and Dana happened about 2 weeks ago, and since then, Greg has written a very interesting article related to their theory on Bigfoot. It's entitled Bigfoot is a Ghost, Interdimensional Sasquatch, the Green Flash, and Why We'll Never Find a Body. And in his article, which was really well written, he links to several videos and clips of their experiences. I actually hadn't seen any of the videos, and so between that and the article, I feel way more educated on Bigfoot in general than I was before. It really is interesting, so I think you should check it out. You'll find this link in the show notes for this episode at bigseance.com.
You're listening to the Big Seance Podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out bigseance.com for more discussion.
Welcome to Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. I have an article here that has a very sad opening, but it quickly turns into sort of a classic ghost story. A stranger comes to town. He sleeps overnight in a room. He has a strange encounter, and when he investigates it the next morning, he finds out that it must have been a ghost. It was published in the Alexandria Gazette on March 17th of 1888, and the headline is Ghost of a Murdered Girl. Everyone along the upper Ohio Valley remembers the terrible murder of Nancy Jane Ware in the little village of Empire, Jefferson County, Ohio. This crime and the arrest, trial, and conviction of the murderer Edward Householder were for many months the sensation of the surrounding county, and the memory of the case was suddenly revised 2 or 3 weeks ago in a rather sensational manner. For a long time after the murder of Nancy Ware, the house which she had occupied, an unusually large building, was unoccupied. But it was finally rented by Mrs. Hamilton, who proposed to make a living by taking boarders. Her patrons were mostly the potters who were employed on the West Virginia side of the river, and among them there soon spread a story that the house was haunted by the ghost of the murdered girl. Very little credence was placed in these stories by healthy-minded residents, and the idea of a ghost was ridiculed by Mrs. Hamilton. Thus matters stood until last Wednesday evening, when there alighted from the Pittsburgh train a traveling man for a Philadelphia dry goods house, who was desirous of crossing the river to visit some of his customers in New Cumberland. He found the ice running too heavily to admit his being ferried over, and he found accommodations for the night at Mrs. Hamilton's. What follows is best told in his own language. After supper, I was escorted to a large apartment on the second floor. The room was fairly well furnished, and after sitting at the fire for a while, I retired, leaving the lamp burning brightly on a small table near the fire and on the opposite side of the room from the bed. I had probably been asleep 2 hours when I was suddenly startled wide awake by an indescribable feeling. As I rose in bed, I glanced across the room and was startled to see a young and very pretty girl sitting in a chair beside the table upon which the lamp was sitting. After looking at her a moment, I asked, "What's wanted?" As I spoke, the girl turned her face more fully toward me, with the expression of one who had been recalled from a pleasant revelry by the voice of a friend, and smiled at me. I hesitated a moment, and then got out of bed and advanced toward the girl, who kept on looking full in my face. When I was almost within reach of her, and was about to speak again, she suddenly faded from sight, and at the instant she became invisible, the lamp went out, leaving me in total darkness. I relighted the lamp as soon as possible, but no trace of my fair visitor could be seen. I examined the door and windows, but all were securely fastened. Greatly puzzled, I went back to bed, and shortly afterward fell asleep, and was not again disturbed until morning. On going downstairs, I related my adventure to Mrs. Hamilton, who told me about the murder, and added that the chamber I had occupied was the one the body of Miss Ware had been discovered in by her sister. I asked for a description of the dead girl, and that given me tallied exactly with the apparition I had seen. Late in the morning, I secured a photograph of Miss Ware, and there before me was the picture of the girl who I had seen seated at the table in my bedroom the night before. The resemblance was perfect. It must be remembered that previous to my retiring for the night, I was not even aware of the commission of the murder in the village. It's an interesting story. It's the ghost is not troubled. There's not unfinished business. The ghost doesn't seem to be in pain. It seems like the ghost just returned to say, everything's fine. You've been listening to Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. I have close to 300 of these articles, all of them authentic, all of them published in U.S. newspapers between 1865 and 1918. I post one each Wednesday on my website. The name of the website is The Merry Ghost Hunter. You can give it a Google, and I hope you stop by.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Seance podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
A big shout out this week to Genesis Solis Carrion, and I hope I didn't butcher that too much. Genesis wrote a great 5-star review for the show in iTunes. It reads as follows. I've been enjoying this podcast for about 2 months now. I listen to it while I work out, walk my dog, and even at home. I look forward to each new episode because I always learn something new. The variety of topics discussed captures my attention. I can be caught marathoning previous episodes. Great job, and thank you for providing quality content for us paranerds. I totally appreciate it, Genesis. You rock. Well, to all the paranerds out there listening, you rock too. If you liked this episode, give us a share on the social media of your choice, or email us to a friend who may need a new podcast to listen to. You could grab a friend's phone, pull up the podcast app, search for the Big Seance Podcast, and say, hey, I think you'll like this. Give it a try. Of course, you can paraphrase that to, make it work for an individual situation. Talk to you again soon. And if you're into that kind of thing, keep listening for an outtake after the outro. Peace out. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. Just click on the Big Seance Podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, and iHeartRadio. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
I think we're good to go, man.
Can we do the whole interview with fake British accent?
I know. Let's do 2 versions of it.
Don't entertain this. Don't even entertain this.
I'll do a really bad Cockney British accent.
Oh my God. It'll be like, move your blooming ass!
Spot of tea, governor. I guess that wasn't really...
That was horrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
That was more like the Queen.
I'll still like you, I promise.
Okay.
Psst. If you made it all the way to the end, your paranerd hashtag is Bigfoot is a ghost. All one word. Tweet me at Big Seance and Greg and Dana at Weird HQ with hashtag Bigfoot is a ghost. Then we'll know who the true paranerds are. Bye.